To hell with the date on your birth certificate. Let's talk about what we have in common across generations. Life, sex, and tech at any age. Welcome to Age Blind with Nancy A. Shenker.
Hey, boys and girls, and welcome to the first summer episode of Age Blind. So, Age Blind is basically all about the fact that the date on your birth certificate is meaningless. It's sex, life, and tech across the generations, and looking for things that we have in common rather than the things that divide us. So, one thing we have in common, and one of our most popular topics to talk about here on Age Blind, is sex. And sex, summer, they go together. You're feeling hot, you're getting hot. Hopefully, you're having summer romances, which is the topic of one of our upcoming episodes. You're maybe going to the beach, going on vacation, maybe going to a new place, meeting new people. So, sex and summer go together. I am so blessed to have our guest today. It is Reba Thomas, who is, as her website says, she is an expert on sex education for curious adults. And we're all curious, let's admit it. She's a pleasure-positive certified sex educator, entertainer, and entrepreneur, because sex, of course, should be fun. And we will talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial part. She's the founder and CEO of a company called Sexpert Consultants, LLC, which is geared toward bridging the gap in sex education. Because, as we all know, we had some form of sex education when we were in grade school, high school, our parents clumsily explained things to us. But although sex as an act hasn't really changed throughout the years, how we view it may have. And so the way Reba does that is through public education, e-commerce, and professional development for sexuality professionals. And again, that is a category that for many of you, you may never even heard of, is like, what is a sexuality professional? We've had a few of them on our show so far, but without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Reba to talk a little bit about what she does and how she got into this industry in the first place.
Hello, hello. Thank you, Nancy, for having me on. Yes, I am a certified sex educator, a sexpert, if you will, and I am the CEO of a company called Sexpert Consultants. And basically, what we do, the way I got into this work was I have always kind of been that friend with no filter, right? Like, I don't have a problem talking about sex and, all the graphic details in between. And so in college, I sold pleasure accessories, right? Sex toys, and made a killing because no one needs sex toys more than college students who are still curious about their bodies and really not sure like how things work, right? And so I found that before I could even sell a sex toy, I had to like teach people about their bodies and how they worked. So I had taken a certification course as a part of my like it was an optional training for people who are like nerds, right? And so I took this course at Indiana University and it was on sexual health promotion. That was like my entree into sex education. And what I found was that first of all, the clitoris was not like widely publicized in the medical community until 1998. What? I was alive then? Like, why? Why are we just now finding out about the clitoris that has been around since mankind and literally we're not publicizing the full anatomy of the clitoris until literally I was old. Like I was born, right? Like I was on this earth when we discovered. In fact, we discovered the endocannabinoid system, like, cannabis and the clitoris in the same year, 1998. That's crazy. Okay. Anyway, so when I figured that out, when I was like, oh, people don't know these things and people don't know what the prostate is and how it also is a part of sexual pleasure. And so I was like, oh, I have to like teach people these things. And so as while I was selling toys, I started developing curriculum. Like, okay, how can I teach people these things in a fun and engaging way, right? And so I kind of almost as a joke because a friend who would like come to my little Tupperware parties, my little, that's what I call them, Tupperware parties, right? But my friend who would come, she was like, you should teach classes. And so kind of as a joke, I started the Blow His Mind Fellatio 101 class. And
Love
I
it.
put it up on the internet and like sold tickets and people actually like came. Like I sold out. I only put like, okay, I was working at a nonprofit at the time. we could like rent out the conference room at this, like, it was like WeWork. It was a WeWork, right? And so we could rent the conference room on the
You
weekend.
sell out every banana in the cafeteria.
Sure did. Every banana and every cucumber, right? So I took all the bananas and cucumbers. I went up to the top floor conference room and I taught my classes every weekend. And I would sell out. And so, anyway, long story short, radio personality. Her name is Sarah Fraser. She covers like all of the reality TV shows now. She's in LA. She's great. But she used to be in DC and she came to my class and she came to like one of my first classes and she was so impressed. So she had me come on her live show and I literally sold out every weekend for like 2 years after that. And so, we built a platform and I realized, look, so many people need this education, but not a lot of people like know how to do it. And so I formed a board, a sexual health education advisory board, where I have gynecologists, pelvic floor therapists, sex therapists. They all sit on this board and they help me develop the curriculum that we now teach and we teach other people to teach. So let's say, Nancy, you were like, hey, I want to teach classes in my community. You could totally do that. And Sexpert Consultants would certify you and then give you a platform to do that. So that's what I do and that's how
Oh,
I do it.
excellent. I may take you up on that because what I'm finding on my podcast and in my dating series, people are always asking me to define terms for them. I wrote an article for a travel website for women over 45 and it was a glossary of terms that I felt like, I always liked teaching and mentoring, so this is definitely something for me to consider. And you hit on something. If Reba looks familiar, it may be because you have seen her on television, because I do have a minor celebrity in my midst, which is how I found her, because she is one of my favorite people to watch on TV. And that's all I'll say about that. But yes, it's great that you've been able to build that. And it started in a college dorm room. And it is a category that, people talk about sex in whispered tones. And there is a lot of, there are a lot of sexual issues and dysfunction out there. And the only way we're kind of going to fix it is by normalizing it and making it okay for people to talk about in public with their friends, with their doctor, with other people in their lives.
So I was recently at a conference and I heard an academic call this a third space, right? So you have your primary space, which is home, right? You have your secondary space, which is usually work, right? But then you have these third spaces, right? Where you learn and you have social interactions. And so we learn the most at home, right? Then we learn at work, but then we learn in these other spaces. And so the third spaces where we learn about sexuality are like yoga class or the hairdresser or these are all professionals who find themselves like you, who find themselves in the position like having created this third space where people feel safe to talk about these things. And so the more, you're right, the more we can create these third spaces for people to talk about things in a normal way, I think tides will shift, and that's what I'm hoping for. So
Yeah, and comparing notes and I think it's, you and I were talking about this before we started recording, is I found in my own age group, even though we're age blind here, but people over 50, 60, we did grow up in a very different era where I'm probably the exception because my father was a gynecologist, but a lot of people didn't talk about sex at home, or they learned about sex in weird ways, or men who were married for long periods of time and their wife may not have been sexually fulfilled. They were not sexually fulfilled. Then they get out into the world of singlehood because they're either divorced or widowed. And they're like kids in a candy store. And that's why the STI rate is skyrocketing among older adults, because they don't necessarily didn't get the kind of education that I think younger people are getting today, for better or worse. I mean, it's everywhere today. There's still a lot of misinformation out there. But the thing I get the most
100%.
questions about, Reba, and I know that you are an sexpert on this topic, is the whole ENM, which stands for ethical non-monogamy, the whole ENM poly open relationship swinging world. So if you can seventh grade level, just explain what that is, why it exists, your view on it, who it's right for, who it isn't right for, and what some of the pitfalls might be. And I realize that's a lot, but you've been doing this a long time. I'm sure you can distill it down to seventh grade level.
Yes. Okay. So let's start at the top, right? So there is monogamy, which is being with one person in a relationship and no one else, right? And then we have anything outside of that, which is non monogamy, right? So non monogamy is in monogamous spaces called cheating, right? Which is why a lot of monogamous people, when they hear anything that's about non monogamy, they're like, what? That can't be. That's cheating, right? Because the idea of monogamy is that person A and person B, when they meet, they date. They get on this relationship escalator. So they go together, right? And now they're dating and now they're in a relationship and now they're getting engaged and now they're married and they're together forever as one, right? That's what monogamy says, this idea of one, right? Two people becoming one.
Or if they're older, they date, maybe they're dating multiple people. They narrow the field down. They find somebody who they really like, and then they DTR, define the relationship, and they just decide that they
Mhm.
are going to be exclusive. Now, that's a fuzzy area these
Yes.
days because does that mean you shut down all of your dating profiles? Does that mean you pause them? Like, that's a whole other show to talk about dating etiquette. And that is actually going to be one of my books in my series. But yeah, so we'll save that for another day. But you can, like, as you get, the path you described is a common path for people in their 20s. The rules are totally different when you've been married before, been in a
When you're old.
relationship, and now you're free reign.
Yes. Yes, but the end goal for monogamy is two people together with no one else forever, right? However long that is, right? So non-monogamy, right, has there's so many different relationship types and styles and ways to practice non-monogamy. But there's only one way that's not cheating, and that's ethical non-monogamy, right? Ethical non monogamy says that two partners have decided that they want to be together, but their relationship is not exclusive, meaning they can see other people and have other relationships, but they have this relationship together, right? That's ethical non monogamy. Now, that can look like so many different things. And I want to be clear that even in ethical non monogamy, if you break the trust, if you aren't transparent, if you're dishonest, that is also cheating, right? Because now we have removed the ethics of it and it is just non monogamy. And that, again, is cheating. And I think this idea of non monogamy as cheating, I think whenever you lie or you're dishonest or you're not transparent, I think that is like the thing that we're trying to eliminate. And so, not just cheating, right? It's all of those things that are considered a violation of your relationship. So,
And if you're going to open up your relationship, or you are in a relationship and you realize that you're just not wired for monogamy and that you don't believe that you can ever commit to monogamy, what are some of the categories of rules that you need to negotiate as you enter into that?
well, I think it depends, right? So I think if you're in a relationship with a person and you decide, hey, I can't be monogamous, right? Let's say, I don't know, a lot of people come into non-monogamy or ethical non-monogamy from having been cheaters in monogamous relationships, right? So you realize, okay, I keep trying this monogamy thing, it's not working. What does it look like for you to feel fulfilled? I think that's where you have to start, right? Because I think earlier before we got on, I think you were talking a little bit about how like some people have that rush of like cheating, like, oh, the adrenaline rush of knowing I'm doing something forbidden, something taboo, right? That's not going to be solved by an ethical non-monogamy, right? Like that's that I'll take that back. It won't be solved only by ethical non-monogamy, right? Like you and your partner have to have this conversation, right? Maybe you have to explain to your partner, "Hey, I like to feel like I'm getting away with something," right? Like that really turns me on, right? And so then it becomes ethical because you guys can talk about how like there can be transparency in a space where you can still allow that for yourself, right? Because the other thing is, you have to address the risks that come with not being soul partners, right? So making sure, like, how do we address STI risk, and are we having like fluid bonded sex with everyone, or are we having protected sex, and what does that look like, and how often are people getting tested, and like these are deeper conversations that when you're monogamous you're supposedly not, like, you don't need to have, but even when you're monogamous you need to have these conversations. So
Yeah, or falling in love with somebody who's in your, on the outside, and then the monogamous relationship could wind up being compromised. And that's just a reality. I met a young woman who was in her 20s, and she said that her parents were swingers, which, basically, and she said the kids knew about it. The parents were trying to keep it a secret, but she knew that they went out, every weekend and swapped partners with other couples and partied, and both parents ended up falling in love with other people and getting divorced. And she
Mm.
understood why they were doing what they were doing, but she also saw the fallout could be. And
Yeah,
the problem there
yeah,
wasn't
and
the swinging. The problem,
what
I
was
was
the
having this
problem? What the
conversation the other
problem
day
isn't
with
the swinging. What was the
the problem was, and again, I don't know the intimate ins and outs of the situation, pun intended, but I think there was probably something fundamentally missing in the core relationship that both parties thought they were finding in those other people. And, looking at the statistics for divorce rates in second or third marriages, and, someone who was married for 27 years, I know that, when you're out in the dating world, you're not just going to find a replacement part and say, "Oh, that person is different from my spouse, or they're like my spouse, and they're going to be better in some way," because the problem that it all starts with you as an individual. It's like, what do I want? What do I need? You've got to be honest with yourself first before you can be honest with other people.
Yeah, and you tell that story, and I know for the kids, it's probably a hard story to tell, right? Because it's the story of how their parents divorced, but it's also the story about how their parents loved each other enough to help each other find happiness, right? And I think that's beautiful. I think that when divorces happen in that way, they both realize, wow, the thing that we were missing, the thing that we were like finding every weekend is actually the thing that we need. And they could both have that conversation, end it amicably, still co-parent their kids and move on. Like, I think you don't see you don't see that often in monogamy, to be fair. Like, you just don't. You wouldn't see that happening with monogamous couples. And so while, yes, it was hard for the kids to go through that, it would have been harder for the kids to go through their parents living together and being miserable with each other and not finding that happiness, or divorcing even sooner, right? So, I don't know. I'm no expert when it comes to like therapy and relationships, but I will say that there was a recent study done that says monogamous people and polyamorous people are as happy, if not happier, in their relationships than monogamous people. So I just think that there's something to be said about having relationships where you can be radically transparent, right? Where you can be completely honest, right? Because look, to be fair, in monogamous relationships, it's really hard to like see a fine man walk by and not be like, "Oh, wow, he's handsome," and not have your partner feel a way about it, right? And rightfully so, because you guys are monogamous. There's supposed to be no one outside of that. And so when you're looking, it's like, "Oh, how dare you look? Is that a threat?" Right? Like, I get that. I get it. I get it. But, in ethical non-monogamous relationships, it's a little easier to say, "Man, that guy's fine," because you guys have had that conversation. You know that me thinking that person is fine is not going to change our relationship, you know?
Right. Or if you're in a monogamous relationship, incorporating that into your role playing and your routine is to say, we're going to go out to a bar. We're going to, pick up other people, or we're going to just sit there at the bar and, say, okay, if you had a quote unquote hall pass for the night, who would you want to take home? And understand more about your partner just by having those conversations, which most
To be
people
fair,
probably would
like to
not
overshare
want to do.
that's how my relationship with polyamory in my marriage started. We kind of were like, well, what would you do if you had a hall pass? And we were both like, oh, that's funny. That's cool. So then we started with hall passes. We were like, okay, well, what if you had a hall pass? Like, what if you could do it? Like, let's give each other hall passes. And that kind of started the conversation around like, what would non-monogamy, ethical non-monogamy look like in our relationship? So
Oh, you answered my question because I was gonna ask what the impetus was for your choosing an ethically non-monogamous lifestyle. Which again, we have to
yeah, I mean,
normalize this stuff because there are enough people doing it that it's not dirty and it's not shameful and it's not cheating and it's just people choosing to live a certain way that is not the approved way according to the Bible of living a certain way. But, there's no technology in the Bible either, not to be anarchistic. I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of trolls on this one, but the world has changed, people have changed. Well, people haven't changed that much, but, as someone who's been on this earth for 69 years, I've seen so many things change from the time I was 9 years old to the time I'm 69 years old, and one of those things has to be how marriage is structured, because if anything had a 50% fail rate, if planes crash 50% of the time, if you got food poisoning 50% of the time that you were eating at restaurants, things would change and the fail rate. The divorce rate is at 50% to 70% now, depending on where you're living. So clearly something needs to change. And maybe, you know, people have thrown around a lot of ideas like marriages that renew every 7 years or relationships or ethical non-monogamy is a way of dealing with some of the challenges of long-term marriages. I don't have the answers. I just have the data.
and to be fair, I don't have the answers either. I just have my experience, right? And so, and I, as I talk about ethical non-monogamy, as I do on television, I just want to stress that this is not an easy route, right? It's not like, oh, I'm a cheater, so I'm going to be non-monogamous. I'm going to be ethically non-monogamous, and it's going to be much better. And it's like not, right? Because when we are ingrained in monogamous society, it is really hard to be radically transparent. It's really hard to be radically honest, right? So let's not like discount the fact that like it's not an easy path, right? But I think that there is a shift that's happening. I grew up knowing a lot of the relationships that I was closest to were not like there was infidelity, right? And a lot of the people that I know, the women that I know who are in these relationships were either knowingly or unknowingly non-monogamous, right? And notice I'm not saying ethically non-monogamous, but they were knowingly or unknowingly non-monogamous, right? They're in non-monogamous relationships. And so rather than walk through my life demanding or pretending that everybody is monogamous because everybody is not, right? What does it look like to accept people for who they are, right? And accept myself for who I am and allow myself to have the desires that I have and allow myself the freedom to act on the desires that I, may or may not have, right? But also have that conversation with my partner, right? So let's say I have a desire I want to act on. I'm going to have that conversation with my primary partner before things get to a point where I'm like, let me tell you about this new relationship that I'm already in, right? Like you kind of have to, you have to be honest. Hey, I met someone today. Hey, I went on a date. I did like, that is hard. That's a hard thing, especially when you come from monogamy
Right,
where you don't
because
have to say
nobody
any of
likes
that.
to hurt somebody. Yeah, no one likes to hurt somebody, no one likes to get somebody angry. I mean, some people probably do, but not the people I'm close to. Like, if you're a people pleaser, just even the thought of having that conversation, it's hard.
Yeah. So it also
Um,
helps you kind of, you as a people pleaser, it helps you say, well, why is it that I feel the need to manage this person's emotion? Right? Like,
yeah, and
why
so
is
you
it that I
mentioned
can't
this
sit with
team
your
of So if our you mentioned this like team of experts that you surround yourself with. So if there is a couple that's considering opening their relationship, or you're single and you realize that you're not really capable of committing to one person and you want to embark on a ethically non-monogamous life. Who are those people? You mentioned, obviously, you're an educator, so you could really help people understand what some of the options are and the rules around them. Who are some of the other
Yeah.
professionals that somebody may want to have in that circle?
So definitely you want to have ethically non-monogamous informed therapist. That is probably going to be the best person for you to go to, like a licensed marriage and family counselor or licensed marriage and family therapist. And I say that because those people who are geared toward ethical non-monogamy, those folks can help you in a healthy way, right? They can help you develop a plan, whether it's going to be to stay together or decouple, right? Because this isn't working for you, right? But these conversations are really hard to have alone, right? You need help. You need a professional to help you. And so that's why when you see me on television talking about ethical non-monogamy, I'm always telling my clients, like, sit with a professional, talk with a counselor or a therapist who specializes in ethical non-monogamy, but a couples counselor, right? So if you were going to go to couples therapy anyway, you can go to couples therapy, but with someone who understands the path that you're trying to take, right? So I would say that first, go there, right? If you're coupled and you're having some issues and you want to transition, there's start with a couples therapist who is ethically non-monogamous friendly, right? The other thing is, if you're single, especially, or if you're just thinking about it, right? Before you even commit to it, like if you're coming from that space and you're in a relationship or you're not, you kind of want to know what it is that is not monogamy, right? Like, what are all of the alternative forms of relationship and what do you want? Right? Like, do you want to be in a triad? Do you want to be in do you just want a threesome? Do you want a throuple? Do you want to be, parallel where your partner does what they do and you do what you do? And it's just, there's never any never any crossing. Do you want to share a partner? Like, what does that look like for you? Like, you have to think about that. And then the way that you think about it is by researching, right? So there are blogs, there are books. One of my favorite books, like to start with, if you're like having a hard time with the like ethics of it. I'm trying to see if I have it on my bookshelf here. I don't. I think I may have given it, but let someone borrow it. But it's called "It's Okay to Not Be Monogamous," and it's by Justin Clardy, and
Love
it's
that.
a philosophical
It
paper.
sounds
But
like a kid's potty training book.
it's okay to not be monogamous, and it talks about like. Go ahead.
I said, it sounds like a kid's book, like, how to use the potty. Like, basically, but that's why I said, like, if you break it down at a basic level, it demystifies it.
And you start there, right? Like, start with because the hardest part about being non monogamous, outside of like being radically transparent and communicative in your relationships, is defending it. Because people hate it. They hate to see you happy and they hate to know that you are a normal person in like living in polyamory, like, or living in ethical non-monogamy. And so like that's the thing. Like, you have to be prepared. You have to, first of all, have enough motivation in you to want to do this, that you're prepared to deal with the questions from your friends and your family and, all the people outside of your space who may find out about what you're doing and have an opinion about it, right? So there's just, I think what I'm trying to say is educate yourself. Stay educated. Find people who are in this space, find your community, right? Like, if you're like, I want to be ethically non-monogamous, then you need to hang out with the ethically non-monogamous people, right? Because you being ethically non-monogamous and still trying to date monogamous people is a problem. That's not gonna work, right? You can't do that. So
Yeah, no, I see that a lot on the dating sites where, a couple is looking for a third, and I'm just at the point where I am in my life, I want to be somebody's primary. I don't want to be an accessory to their relationship. So, knowing what it is that you want. The other thing that I've seen a lot, Reba, is men who say this lifestyle is fine for me, but I don't want my woman doing it. Or the woman goes
yeah, so we
along with it because she wants the man to be happy, but at the end of the day is really not happy. Or the situation you and I were just talking about from one of the reality TV shows where, I think that the woman was really trying to come to terms with her bisexuality and kind of dragged her husband along for the ride. And he was loving it because he now had two women in his bed, but the women's bond was becoming way stronger than his bond with his wife. And we all know that, like, a lot of that is choreographed for viewership, but it is in many ways, a reflection of what could happen in the real world.
It could happen and it does happen, and I've seen it happen many times. And I think the thing is, right? Because what we're noticing, what you're seeing in this relationship, right, that you're describing is, let's say we have a bisexual woman and another woman who loves ladies and a man, right? The bisexual woman and the man were in a relationship. The bisexual woman brings another woman who loves women into that relationship. And now the man is having an issue because the emotional bond between those two women is stronger than the emotional bond between them. And so the issue is not the woman, it's them, right? How do we have a stronger
Right.
emotional bond? Not how do I get rid of this person who you have a stronger bond with? Because at the end of the day, if you love a person, you want them to be happy. And if this person is close to them emotionally, right? And you're like, I don't like that. I'm jealous of this emotional bond. Then, then the ethical thing in this space is to say, okay, let me check my insecurity. Where is that coming from? Oh, it's coming from the fact that we don't have that close of an emotional bond. But I don't want to do the introspection to figure out how to have a closer emotional bond with my wife. So I'm just going to get angry about it. And I'm going to blame it on the person who is providing my wife with happiness and fulfillment right now. Right. So one thing. Right. But I think the other thing is, if this bond is getting closer and these two said, hey, we're just doing this for sex, then this conversation about this bond needs to happen. Right. Because we can't deny that this is happening. Because it's happening, right? So I think that's the other thing, right? When you go into this space, because I think a lot of them, I think, he went into the space like, oh, I have two women, but also what have you done to put in that emotional work with the other one too, right? Do we see him and the other woman having, their time together to establish their relationship? What does that look like for them? Or is it just sexual? Because now we're realizing that sexual bonds are not all that's required, right? There has to be some emotional thing there too, because that's what gives us fulfillment. And so I love that this is playing out on television in this way, because we get a chance to see and have commentary and talk about, like, oh, well, what does happen? Because you did sign up for this. Like, you said we're going to be in this relationship. So what happens when this happens? How do you respond? It's a
And
good
that's
question.
what Dr. Nancy, I'm just kidding. I do not have a medical degree or a PhD, but that's one of the reasons why I do think that couples watching reality TV together, as outrageous as it can be at times, is a really good springboard to talking about relationships and sexuality and saying, oh, look at what they're doing. Is that something you would ever want to do? Why or why not? And it could bring couples
Exactly.
closer. So, the bottom line is if we're gonna
Actually,
normalize this at any age, we need to talk about it.
that's exactly why I chose to do this work, right? I chose to be on TV. I chose to, reveal the parts of myself that I've revealed, because I recognize that in that moment, I'm not just talking to these people, right? I'm talking to the millions of people who are going to see this show, right? And so in those moments, I am really grateful to be able to, to shed a light for people who might not have an opportunity to have this conversation, right? And I think you're right. I think it's very healthy for couples who watch this show together to have these conversations. What would you do? What would you do? I have neighbors who are like, well, if I was them, I would do this. And I'm like, yeah. so so it's good. That's good.
But it's amazing how much you can learn about people by having those conversations. And if they say, "Oh, that's
Yeah.
disgusting. I would never do that." That's about them. That's not about, everyone in the world. So anyway, Reba, this has been
Well,
terrific. And that's actually a really good segue. And the whole reason I launched my personal brand, nancyaf.com, on my 69th birthday this year was to talk about stuff among people of all ages, but as I said, especially my generation was raised, even though it was the era of free love and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it was also the era of getting married in your 20s and thinking you were going to stay married until death do you part. And the reality is that's not the case. So the more I can educate people about life after marriage and everything that's out there, I view it as doing, not to be that lofty that it's a public service, but we need to make
It
some of
is.
these taboo things not as taboo. So, Reba, if people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, so if you want to find me, I am on all things social at Reba the Diva, spelled exactly the way that it sounds. And then if you want to find me online, I'm at rebathediva.com. And if you want to learn more about what we're doing over at Sexpert Consultants, you can visit us online at sexpertconsultants.com.
And that's Reba, REBA, for those people who are listening and not watching. So that's a really great segue. We are on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts. And please follow me at nancyaf underscore on Instagram or nancyaf.com. And you could see what the F stands for. It's not just what you think it is. And we launched on February of 2025 on my 69th birthday, and I'm just getting started. So thank you so much, Reba. You've been a tremendous guest. And if you have any questions or you'd like to be a guest on my show, it's nancyashenker@gmail.com. So thank you so much and welcome as our first guest of the hottest summer ever, 2025. And just keep on listening for more hot tips. So thanks again, Reba. Peace
Thanks,
out.
Nancy. Keep going.
Yes.